Hi everyone, how are you? I hope everyone is okay. Today I'm super excited because I'm following with the second season of my first playlist. If you remember, Literature Power. Welcome back to Literature Power series. I hope you enjoy in the previous one because I will continue with the same pattern today. In the previous episode, we talked about the day you began and how Jacqueline Woodson explores difference, belonging, and identity through children's literature. So today I want to continue with another one of my favorite picture books by Jacqueline Woodson, The Other Side. This book is especially meaningful to me because during my PhD research, I spent years studying Woodson's picture books. In fact, I analyzed 13 of her picture books in my dissertation, and later during my time as a visiting scholar at NYU, I already mentioned about it if you remember. I even had the opportunity to meet her in person, like in face. It was my dream, and I achieved it. So every time I return to her work, it feels both academic and personal to me. At first glance, The Other Side seems like a very simple story. It is about two young girls, Clover and Annie. One is black and one is white. Between them stands a fence. Sorry. And throughout the story, the fence becomes much more than a physical object. It becomes a symbol of separation, a symbol of history, a symbol of the invisible boundaries that societies create between people. One of the things I admire most about Jacqueline Woodson is her ability to communicate complex issues through the perspective of children. I think it is a great talent. She never lectures, she never overwhelms the reader. Instead, she allows children to notice things, to ask questions, to become curious, and that curiosity becomes the beginning of understanding. The story takes place during a period of racial segregation in the United States. Clover's mother tells her not to cross the fence because it is not safe. On the other side, Annie is also separated by the same structure. What fascinates me is that neither child initially creates the division. The fence already exists before they arrive. The children inherit it. And I think that is one of the most important messages in the book. Many social divisions are inherited, right? Children are born into systems, histories, and social structures that they didn't create. But the question becomes, do they have to accept them? Or can they imagine something different? This is where friendship enters the story. Clover and Annie began talking across the fence. At first, there is a distance, then curiosity, then conversation, and eventually friendship. The fence remains physically represent uh, throughout much of the story, but emotionally it begins to lose its power. I find this incredibly powerful because Woodson is showing us that social barriers often survive through silence. The moment people begin talking to one another, those barriers start becoming weaker. One of my favorite moments in the book is when the girls sit on the fence together. This image may seem simple, but symbolically it is extraordinary. They are no longer standing on opposite sides. They are not fully crossing the boundary either. Instead, they occupy the space in between. And that in between space is where transformation happens. In literary studies, we often talk about borders and liminal spaces. These are spaces between categories, between identities, between cultures. between established positions. The fence becomes exactly that kind of space. Another reason I love this book is because it refuses easy solutions. The fence doesn't suddenly disappear. Segregation doesn't magically end overnight. Woodson understands that social change is slow, but she also understands that change begins with human relationships. It begins with recognizing the humanity of someone who has been placed on the other side. And that phrase, the other side, is important because every society creates an other. Someone who is different, someone who does not belong, someone who is viewed as separate. Throughout history, people have been divided according to race, language, religion, nationality, gender, class, and many other categories. What this book asks us to consider is very simple. What happens when we stop looking at someone as the other and seeing them as a person? That question may sound simple, but it is one of the most powerful questions literature can ask, I think. I also believe the illustrations contribute significantly to the story. I really love them, all of them, all these illustrations. The fence visually divides the pages, constantly reminding readers of separation. At the same time, the illustrations emphasize the similarities between the girls. They love, they play, they wonder, they dream. The more we read, the harder it becomes to focus on their differences. Instead, we begin noticing their shared humanity, and perhaps that is exactly Woodson's goal. As someone who studies children's literature, I often tell my students that picture books are never just for children. My students now remember me, I think. Books like The Other Side teach lessons that many adults still struggle to learn. They encourage empathy, they encourage dialogue, and they encourage us to question boundaries that seem natural but are actually socially constructed. What I find particularly inspiring about Jacqueline Woodson's work is that she doesn't simply expose social problems, she imagines possibilities. Her books acknowledge pain and inequality, but they also leave room for hope, right? And in today's world, I think that hope matters. Not a naive hope, not a hope that ignores reality, but a hope grounded in human connection. By the end of the book, Clover imagines a future where many children sit together on the fence. For me, that image captures the entire message of the story. The goal is not simply crossing to the other side. The goal is creating a world where there are no meaningful sides at all, where differences remain but divisions lose their power. And that is why The Other Side remains one of the most important picture books about race, friendship, and belonging. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you have read The Other Side, I would love to hear your thoughts, your commentaries. And if you have not read it yet, please do. I highly recommend it. It's a short book, I know, but it asks very big questions. See you in the next episode. Take care. Bye.